Genshin Impact has some catching up to do in comparison to other gacha games in a good amount of aspects. And today I want to talk about some of them which I believe will make Genshin Impact a better game if they do catch up in them. Hey everyone, Sayrum here. So I have been playing Genshin Impact consistently for almost 3 years now, with a light amount of money spent. It is safe for me to say that it is one of my favorite games in general, and not just gacha games, because it is the first gacha game I have ever played, meaning that is when my life started spiraling downhill ever since into a loop I had no idea about. And according to a lot of players and content creators during the early days of Genshin Impact, it truly fell way ahead of the gacha games competition, making it super difficult for the competition, which didn't exist back then by the way, to catch up to its quality. Being the first gacha game to step into the open world genre, with a really good art style, and let's not forget, it was basically a free-to-play version of another popular game on Nintendo called Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a game you definitely heard of. Plus the fact that it is a live service game with consistent updates helped contribute into making the game feel fresh, exciting, and possibly make it level up even more in quality thanks to the updates, which putting quarantine aside is what made it super popular fast. Following its enormous success, other gacha game developing companies will start competing, with the first recognized competitor being Tower Fantasy launching on December 16, 2021, which flopped massively. Once again proving Genshin Impact is still ahead of the competition in aspects like character design, open world design, and the overall story. But who else is capable of making a game as good quality as Genshin Impact? As you can guess, it is none other than Hoyoverse themselves. With the release of their newest game Honkai Star Rail, not so long after the launch of Honkai Star Rail, players and content creators started going after Genshin Impact for a couple of reasons. The biggest one being the lack of combat in-game content in Genshin Impact, which Honkai Star Rail has a clear advantage over with game modes like the MOC, Pure Fiction, and the Simulated Universe, which also has its own game modes like Golden Gears. Many Genshin fans expressed how the combat and the character building is their favorite part of the game, but they have no place except the Spiral Abyss to truly have challenging combat, which only resets once per month. Basically, the fact that a brand new game has more in-game than our beloved 3-year-old game at the time was pretty humbling. Plus the better reward situation like a free temple every patch, and not to forget the free doctor ratio situation, which was literally a civil war among the Hoyoverse community. And HSR having more trailblazer power alongside an overcap system, something Genshin players like me wanted for a long time, and still do by the way. Quiet literally started a war within the communities. Many would consider Honkai Star Rail having these clear advantages over Genshin Impact nothing but a marketing strategy from Hoyoverse, merely to promote their new game Honkai Star Rail by making it have these clear advantages. Until Honkai gains its own player base, then these advantages will make their way into Genshin Impact. But even after over a year of Honkai's launch, none of that happened. Things kept going that way where Honkai kept getting more features, starting a new mini war every patch, until things started to cool down a little in the communities, but not too long after, two types of fuel on fire happened, which are first Wuthering Waves, and the second one is Sunless Zone Zero. Wuthering Waves has some clear advantages over both Honkai Star Rail and Genshin Impact, which became clear these days. Even though Wuthering Waves has an advantage over both games, the comparison mainly happens with Genshin Impact, since both of these games fit the same genre of open world gacha games, with advantages like a skip button for the story, the recently announced Echo loadout, which is like the heavily requested artifact loadout in Genshin Impact, and better open world traversal with no stamina consumption while running, parkour, and literally flying, with many of them being features players have asked for and wanted ever since the launch of Genshin Impact, like the skip button for the dialogue, and artifacts loadout. But if we take a step back into the time of Wuthering Waves launch, Genshin Impact did ever so slightly catch up in terms of endgame content in the launch of their version 4.7. By releasing the Imaginarium Theater permanent game mode, which did have mixed opinions, and many believed Genshin released it only for the sake of competing with Wuthering Waves, and not for the sake of improving the game. But it still wasn't enough, since both Wuthering Waves and Honkai Star Rail kept consistently adding more combat in-game modes to their games every couple of patches. It seems like Genshin Impact, the game that was once so ahead of the competition, is struggling to keep up with the consistency of both games. On top of that, they did increase the resin cap from 160 to 200 before the launch of WUWA. But once again, the competition seemed to be a step ahead with them both adding a overcap system, and Honkai Star Rail recently increasing their power cap to 300 in version 3.0. With the launch of Natlan, Genshin tried to take a step ahead by introducing a mechanic where you can craft any type of artifact from whichever set, a feature Honkai Star Rail did have, but the advantage Genshin wanted to have is the fact that you can choose what substats your artifact will have, which was a very nice addition, don't get me wrong, but not only was it awkward like having to wait over a month to craft one, it didn't take long for the competition to catch up. Not only did Star Rail introduce a mechanic where you can choose the substats, but there's also a new dice that you can use which will change how your relic or artifact rolled. For example, if you had 3 rolls on defense and 1 on crit damage, you can use the dice, and if you're lucky enough, it will become 3 crit damage rolls and 1 defense roll, basically adding more RNG on top of the RNG. Now let's bring up the second Fuel on Fire, which is in List Zone 0. But how is that game ahead of Genshin Impact? Simply the details of the character models. The models in ZZZ are super good, whether it's their unique style, high amount of details in the outfits and the models, or their expressions which reflect on the character's personality, which just makes them feel more alive. Back during the early Genshin days, the character models were considered great, but there is the issue of them reusing the models instead of creating new and fresh models, which can make things feel stale. Furthermore, ZCC not only had the previous advantages of the competition, but also proved that Hoyoverse games can have a skip button in them. Plus, with the newest announcement from Honkai Star Rail, it will also be getting a skip button, leaving Genshin Impact the only one among Hoyoverse's big 3 and the competition without one, unless they do add one. Also, a part no one wants to mention is how Genshin collabs aren't so exciting. Once again, don't get me wrong, the Genshin Duolingo collab was pretty cool, but not to the level of Honkai Star Rail's upcoming Fate collab. What we want is collabs that will bring new elements to the game, like characters and new storylines, allowing the collab to be accessible for every player and not just collabs with phone companies. For example, making the excitement of the collab be locked behind a $600 smartphone. We need more collabs like the Genshin Impact Honkai Impact 3rd collab, which brought a new character official, allowing everybody to share the excitement of the collab. Genshin currently isn't that far behind in that aspect, since the competition doesn't have any cool collabs going on currently. But just like that, Genshin Impact went from the only game having everything to the game falling behind the competition. From things I mentioned earlier, whether it's not having new fresh detailed character models, lack of core quality of life features like a skip button, resin overcap and a better open world traversal, or whether it's the lack of combat in-game modes, or just combat game modes in general. It seems like these days Genshin is continuously falling back while the competition is getting way ahead. And what makes things even more disappointing is the fact that all of these clear advantages the competition have over Genshin Impact are features requested by the player base and some content creators for a long time, but unfortunately they never got implemented. As a Genshin player myself and a fan of the game, I believe Genshin Impact can easily gain back its ground by simply implementing the features mentioned and adding new features the other currently don't have. Since for a game as big and successful as Genshin Impact, it shouldn't be an issue for these things to come to the game. Because if things keep going this way, the game will reach a point where the competition is so ahead, it will take years for Genshin Impact to catch up to the competition, just like how it took the competition years for them to catch up to Genshin Impact. There are parts that Genshin Impact does better than the competition, like the better music. The open world of Genshin Impact still stands strong in being one of the best in terms of design and looks, and the combat, which is a subjective one. Yes, I like the elemental system of Genshin Impact. Overall, Genshin Impact currently is in a middle spot where it can make a comeback. But I think we can all agree that Genshin lost its throne in being the gacha game that no other gacha can exceed in quality. If you've enjoyed, please do consider leaving a sub, a like, and as usual, I hope to see you soon.